faces, I see.
Bayonetta
3 is one of the most enjoyable games I've played in a long time. It takes its tried and tested formula to new heights and raises the bar for action games to come. Bayonetta 1 put the newly formed Platinum Games on the map, and after some trouble during production, Nintendo published Bayonetta 2 exclusively for the Wii U in 2014. There had always been talks about there being a Bayonetta 3, with series lead Hideki Kamiya casually confirming the sequel a year after Bayonetta 2 was released. Bayonetta 3 was officially announced in the 2017 Jeff Keighley Awards bonanza.
You know, Jeff, you thought I came all the way up here
to kick your ass. Yes, alright, well thank you so much, Reggie.
The director of the previous game, Yusuke Hashimoto, left Platinum Games at the start of 2019, which led to Bayonetta having yet again a new director at the helm, Yusuke Miyata, with Hideki Kamiya being credited as an executive director. Miyata was heavily involved with the Microsoft-funded cancelled project Scalebound, whose DNA is all over this game. All the old blood return, with Yuji Shimomura for cinematic and Mari Shimazaki for the character design. I don't know about this Bayonetta or the blue goop enemies. I still prefer the Bayonetta 2 character designs because they're so weird to look at, but hey, that's just me. I don't necessarily want to discuss the elephant in the room, which is the pre-release voice actor drama. I think it happened, and I don't think less of anyone involved. For those who don't know, here's a clip.
Max, what happened? No, it's just unfair. I'm leading, he wants to pass, he pushed me, I push him back, and after he pushed me off the track. It's not fair, eh?
Charles, what happened with Max?
Nothing, just an incident.
Nintendo revealed the first gameplay trailer in September 2021 during a direct. Bayonetta 3 released on October 28, 2022 exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. The story follows Bayonetta and new character Viola as they stop this guy, Singularity, from destroying the multiverse, which means hopping through alternate realities and running into a bunch of other Bayonettas. The story is completely separate from the first two games and is going more for an epic feel rather than a fun one. This is coming from a game where you punch literal God into the sun. Bayonetta seems more serious, the stakes have never been higher. I don't mind Bayonetta's story if it takes a backseat to the gameplay. However, Bayonetta 3 has these long-ass cutscenes just dumping information onto you, like it's a Metal Gear game. All the familiar faces return like Rodan and Enzo, but as usual we barely get any time with them. The same can be said for all the other Bayonettas. There's little to no interactions with them, which feels like a missed opportunity. Overall, Bayonetta is known for its story, and this is definitely one of the weaker ones in the franchise. Look, Bayonetta 2 holds a special place in my heart, but it was just the next logical step. Bayonetta 3 goes straight back to the drawing board. It's been a while in between games, and they've made Nier Automata in that time. Combat has had a complete overhaul, with the gameplay constantly shifting to keep things interesting. And that's where the game excels. Bayonetta 3 is much longer than 1 and 2, but you really can't tell because the game is always throwing so much at you, sometimes too much. There's parts during boss fights or a chase where the game is like, learn this new thing, or just die. I absolutely adore Bayonetta's take on hack and slash combat, with Metal Gear Rising being too simple and Devil May Cry's Dante being way too complicated. Bayonetta is just right. She has kicks, punches, and her trusty guns. If you dodge at just the right moment, you enable Witch Time. This freezes enemies, making Bayonetta invulnerable, allowing her to deal some serious damage. Enemies indicate with an obvious audio cue. This is to compensate for the visual noise going on during combat. Lock-on is now a toggle that's mapped to the right stick, which is more conventional, but is slower than the quick lock-on from the previous games. The biggest change Bayonetta 3 makes is to the summons. Wicked Weaves are gone. They've been replaced by the Demon Masquerade ability. So instead of summoning Madama Butterfly, swat some bad guys for you, Bayonetta transforms into her current summon and deals the damage herself. Rather than Bayonetta's demon counterpart showing up in the cutscene at the end of a boss fight, now you can control them during combat, replacing Umbran Climax from the previous game. The summons work sort of like the ones in Final Fantasy VII or how the dragons would have worked in Scalebound. The downsides being your summons can turn on you if they take too much damage, and it drains your magic meter and leaves Bayonetta vulnerable to attacks. However, you can work around it with an accessory you get later on in the game. There's 8 new weapons as well as a bunch of old ones from previous games, all with what seems to be an infinite amount of combos. You can even improvise combos on the fly. Instead of having 2 separate weapons on your hands and legs, Bayonetta now only wields 1 weapon at a time, but can quick swap between a second equipped weapon during a combo. It used to be that upgrades, items, and skills could be bought with a single currency at the Gates of Hell. Bayonetta 3 has 3 separate currencies, which is confusing at first, but does make a difference. Orbs are used to buy items and weapons at the Gates of Hell, while halos are reserved exclusively for cosmetic items so that you don't have to pick and choose between the two. So go wild spending your halos. Also, I can't believe I have to specify this, but there are no microtransactions. A new addition to the game is Viola, a numbered witch in training from a parallel dimension. Compared to Bayonetta's other sidekicks from previous games,
Shite. Damn it. Oi. Whatever, love.
she's not the worst, but is extremely fun to play as. Viola can only activate Witch Time by executing a perfect parry, which feels like a small difference, but it turns the game from Bloodborne to Sekiro. Viola just has the one summon, Cheshire, the giant smoking cat tied to Viola's katana. Unlike Bayonetta summon, Cheshire fights on their own, while Viola fights with her fists and a different moveset. While unarmed, Viola can no longer parry, so it keeps things balanced. Viola is a lot more challenging to play and is a fun curveball to throw day one Bayonetta fans, while still changing things up and keeping things fresh. Also in the game, you can play as Jean in these 2D stealth sections, which I don't hate. In them, you sneak around office buildings, shapeshifting to avoid enemies and taking them out with stealth attacks. You can find various weapons littered around the map to give you an edge when stealth goes awry. I feel like it could have been fleshed out a bit more, but it's a fun minigame distraction in between chapters. Enemies in this game are homunculi, man-made bioweapons. These blue goop monsters come in various shapes and sizes. Enemies are extremely varied and you never know what you're gonna have to deal with during an encounter. Due to someone's playing a big part most of the time, with Bayonetta you're fighting these giant behemoths with the camera pulled back all the way. With Viola you tend to fight smaller enemies carrying weapons, with them being easier to parry. Platinum Games has always been about the over-the-top power fantasy. Although the large-scale battles make you feel like a god, they also distance you from the action, with Bayonetta being a tiny little speck on the screen. Platinum Games were going for a more photorealistic look for this game, which means environments are a lot less colorful than the last game. This is definitely a problem with the early areas. As you battle through the bland grey streets of Tokyo, locations do eventually get more colorful as you progress through the game. That being said, playable areas are massive, far from linear corridors. The maps are filled with bonus challenges and meaningful collectibles like these 3 Umbran blood tears that are next to impossible to get, even if you do find them. But if you do manage to collect them all, they unlock a bonus level which nets you additional weapons and accessories. One problem the levels have are invisible walls, areas you should be able to get to but are closed off, which feels incredibly dated. It wouldn't be a concern, but the game so heavily encourages and rewards exploration. For most puzzles, you control your summon as they move or break objects. They're simple enough and won't have you bashing your head against the wall. Levels are broken up between combat encounters, exploration, and puzzle. A feature that won't go amiss for future playthroughs would be a verse mode, sorta like in The Last of Us Part 2, where you just go through the combat encounter. Bayonetta has something similar, which is the witch trials, but those are just set in the same arena with progressively harder enemies, rather than verses with their ever-changing gameplay. Overall, Bayonetta 3 is on a different level and improves on almost every aspect of the previous games, while telling a much grander story. It's Platinum at their peak, and it really doesn't get better than this.